All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome. I want to introduce you to a wonderful lady that I met back when I was working for the speakers agency. Her name is Libby Gill, and she's the former head of communications and public relations for Sony, Universal, and Turner Broadcasting, as well as the branding brain behind the launch of the Dr. Phil show. Libby's now the CEO of Libby Gill and Company, which is an LA-based executive coaching and consulting firm where she guides emerging and established leaders at organizations including Capital One, Disney, EY, Intel, Microsoft, Warner Brothers, Wells Fargo, and many more to inspire purpose and ignite performance. She's also the author of 4 books, including the award-winning You Unstuck and Capture the Mindshare and the Market Will Follow. Libby's shared her success strategies on CNN, NPR, The Today Show, and in Business Week, Time, The New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and many more. So we're really excited to have her here today to share her wisdom with you about her journey as a speaker. So thank you so much for joining us, Libby.
My pleasure. Happy to be here, Melanie.
Yes, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, that too.
So would you please tell us about how you got started in the speaking industry?
I will. It was one of those funny sort of happenstance things. I was consulting for Dr. Phil and helping launch that whole enterprise, which seems like he needed no launch. Everybody knew who he was, but then at the time he was really known to Oprah viewers, so it was a matter of sort of putting him on the map. And he did seminars as part of his launch of his television show, and still does today. And at one point, I was asked to. My second book had come out while I was there working with him, and I was asked to present at a seminar where he actually happened to be presenting in Canada. And it was my first professional speech. It happened to be 6,000 people in the audience. And and I thought, okay, well, I've done a lot of presentations in business and my corporate days. So I thought, I think I can handle it. And I set the bar very low. I figured if I don't faint on the platform, job well done. All I wanted to do was get through it, because I got on that platform and it was the size of a stadium, and there were giant screens probably 500 feet back, and that stadium sound with the reverb and all of that, and somehow I got through it. I think I did okay, not great, and I just went on from there. So it was sort of I jumped in the deep end, and after that, discovered there's a real art and science to this. And I had the good fortune and the insecurity to go seek out some good teachers and figure out what I needed to learn.
So when you were learning, did you feel like you chose your topic, or did it kind of choose you?
No, I in hindsight, I would have done it completely differently. My topic when I wrote this book called Traveling Hopefully, How to Let Go of the Baggage of Your Past, all about, letting go of those negative stories that we tell ourselves and sometimes that we outgrow, but we still tell ourselves those same stories. I was asked to speak about that, and had somebody like a wise bureau person like you sat me down and said, hey, that's fine, but we're much more interested in your business background. You've worked for these, Fortune 500 companies in a senior leadership role. Let's talk about that. I would have gone much more into a sort of a corporate and a business route than more of the sort of self-help. And I kind of got niched into that work-life balance female speaker trap. And it's not a trap for everyone, but it was for me, because I had a better and different story to tell. But it took me a few years to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. And how did you navigate those waters of transitioning from one to the other?
Well, once people heard it, when I started getting booked enough to figure out what is it that people are attracted to, what makes them book me, what works or what doesn't, it was apparent that my C-level background and a pretty dynamic delivery was a good combination that not a lot of women had. There were some women who were, academics and CEOs, and they had incredible pedigrees, much better than mine, but they weren't always great on the platform. They weren't always good at connecting with an audience or having enough humor or that sort of a dynamic delivery. And then there were other women who were incredibly dynamic but didn't have that C-level background. Mm-hmm. So when I realized, oh, this is a good marriage of the two, and that's why people want to book me, then I really made a point to sort of develop that. And when I hit what I did in the corporate world was lead teams. And that's what made me leave that world and become a coach, because I love that leadership element. That's when it sort of all came together.
Yeah, that's brilliant. If there was anything else, in that beginning journey transition that you could have done differently besides just topic selection, was there something else you might have changed?
I would have gotten help sooner. I would have found people like you. I would have found people who were real experts to help me develop the topic. And it wasn't so much hubris as fear, I think, is that insecurity of, well, gee, I don't really quite know what I'm doing. I better figure this out. And I spent 5 years figuring it out when I could have sat down and paid a decent but not ridiculous sum of money to have someone who was vastly more informed than I was help me navigate those first few years. But eventually I caught up. But anybody that's thinking about it, there are people like you. There's some people online that can really help you and advise you, and it's good as soon as you have a sense of what your passion is and what your expertise is, to seek out some of those people to let them help you put a package together of what to talk about and how to sell yourself, because it's hard and it's very competitive, as you well know.
Yeah, it is. And it's so funny because you never know what you don't know until you sit down and try to explain it to somebody else.
Right. Right.
Even when you're on the flip side, like I joke all the time, if I could apply my powers to myself.
Yes.
Your own kryptonite.
Yes.
What has been your biggest triumph? What are you most proud of accomplishing so far in your career?
Oh gosh, in my career, I think successfully making a transition out of the corporate world into being an entrepreneur. And I had never really thought I would run a business or own a business. And in my early days, because everything I did was communications, public relations, I assumed if I ever did, it would be that. But after 20 years of that, I didn't really want to do that anymore. I was much more interested in helping people grow and develop their own careers.
Mm-hmm.
And most businesses fail in the first 5 years, and I'm knocking wood, 17 years I've had my own business. So it's pretty exciting to have done that and navigated those early ups and downs.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really, really awesome. And I think one of the things that a lot of people who do make that transition or who want to make that transition, what they're looking for is some of the freedom and autonomy that being an entrepreneur, being your own boss offers.
For sure.
Yeah. What about, like, from the perspective of a woman, kind of a woman playing in a man's world, were there any particular obstacles you faced or challenges that you've overcome as, one of the lonely only women on stage at some of the events you've done?
Well, fortunately, I had that training in the corporate world because I wasn't the first woman in entertainment to sort of break through the doors. But in a typical senior leadership meeting, there'd be 10 guys and 2 or 3 women, and I was one of those. Mm-hmm. So I was certainly in that second wave. So I was used to getting outshouted and interrupted and mansplained and all those things that women in the workplace are used to. And worse, quite frankly, as we've seen things coming out now about not just media, but all sorts of businesses. So exposure to that gives you a fairly tough skin. And then getting into the world of speaking, where I discovered pretty quickly, it's not that much different. The people are mostly really heartfelt and really passionate and really want to give back to people. And I love that. I can't wait to go meet other speakers and authors. It's so exciting. Mm-hmm. But I did discover pretty quickly that in a 4-day conference of back-to-back keynotes, I could very well be the only woman. Mm-hmm. And that's a little disheartening, but it's going to evolve like everything else. And I do a lot of work in women's leadership, which I also dearly love. And people are always surprised that I say, I love this, but I'll be so happy when we have these forums only because we want them and not because we need them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, differently. And I think one of the other things that I bet your background has really taught you is how to operate in true partnership with the men you're working with as an ally.
I love working with men. I like I'm more of an individualist than a genderist, but I've had men tell me I've got male energy and action and kick-ass, and there are plenty of women that have that as well. But I like that sort of being upfront, being straightforward, and having a certain strength and authority. And I like that in women. I like that in men. Mm-hmm. So I tend to get along well with men, whether in the audience or in partnership. But at one point I was talking to a bureau partner about writing an article. In fact, we did a first draft of an article about women speakers, and I interviewed several and he interviewed several, and we just decided it sounded whiny, and there was just kind of no way around it sounding a little bit petulant. And I thought, we're just going to keep doing what we do and do the best we can do as speakers and as business people, and it will evolve like the rest of the world.
I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. What would you feel if you went to something and there were, just as many women speaking as men? How would that make you feel?
Oh, I think that would be great fun. I mean, when I go out to a women's event, and I always ask them who's going to be there in terms of what men are coming. And I love it when it's not just the executive sponsor who's responsible for the event, but that there are a lot of men there because they want to learn, and that makes it fun. But there's nothing like a group of women to have a great time and to feel like you can let your hair down and be yourself. And it's a group full of really smart, passionate women. It just doesn't get any better than that for me. So having them in the audience, having them on stage, having them in small group form, all of that is great fun. I would welcome that in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I would too. I know one of the things that I used to get asked all the time when I was working at a bureau is, do you have any women? Do you have any people of color? Because the clients were constantly looking for them, but I don't think a lot of the women or people of color knew like the markers of prestige that they traditionally look for. And so they may not stand out when placed on paper on a table side by side, even if their content and their expertise was just as good as the men who were speaking about the same thing. It's sometimes just about having all the sparkly stuff.
Yeah, you've got to overcome the biases and their unconscious bias, like anywhere else in the corporate world. And it's really ironic because often the meeting planners or the the people that make the first overture to you are frequently women, communications executives or meeting professionals. And I think sometimes they may unconsciously be trying to please their male boss by bringing in more men than women. And also because I think women don't always go the distance because it's hard. And I think some women learn to just give up. It gets hard getting on airplanes. It's hard schlepping all your stuff around. And, it's all those things. But there's such a space and a need for women speakers and women with a message. So I encourage anybody who wants to give it a try, even if it's an adjunct or just a little side to their business, including corporate people or entrepreneurs that have to go out and give presentations of any sort, whether it's to sales prospects. I have a buddy who built her law career giving presentations about, your trust and estate. And she is a great speaker, was never a professional speaker, but she gave tons of presentations. And so there are all kinds of people who need that sort of help.
I know when I'm working with people one-on-one, I don't usually advocate people ever become a full-time speaker. I don't think that most of you want to live the life of a road warrior anymore, where you're just bouncing from hotel to hotel. I usually advocate for the people that I work with to look at making speaking maybe 20 to 30% of your whole business revenue pie, in that you're speaking about what you do and it's one of those premium services because you can't outsource it.
Right. Yeah, nobody can do it for you. And I think that's really realistic. And there are so many people out there, including people who sell to speakers, just like that sell to coaches and consultants, that, you want to get rich quick. And it's just like being an author. That is not a prescription to get rich quick. It's a way to work hard, and you don't ever want to do the math on how much you make per hour, because unless you're in that stratospheric, 2%, it doesn't, you're not going to get rich doing it. And yet, if you have a message and you have something to say and you're passionate and you do your homework and craft it, it can be an amazing piece of your business.
There's something truly to be said for aligning your higher purpose with your life, so that eventually, like, when you're living your dream, you're living your message. Like, isn't it weird how some of that serendipity just falls into place and all these opportunities just start coming your way once you're aligned with that?
In that flow. And yeah, exactly. And I also found, as a writer, and I was always a professional writer in my corporate life, but when I actually started writing books, I felt like I was writing my way to the next level of my life. If I'm going to expose my story, the good and the bad, and claim to be able to help people and do these things and have accomplished things in my own life, it's like, I better walk the talk. I've got to do that. I've got to come through. And I think with every book or every story, you you just, you eke out a little more purpose and a little bit more intentionality in how you live your life.
Yeah. Intention and integrity are
Yeah.
two huge things for me when I see people like occupying a space as an authority, to really feel like it's legit.
Yeah.
They're really, not only are they really an expert in what they talk about, but they're completely like heart and soul on board with it too.
Well, because we know there are plenty of divas out there, and having worked in entertainment and worked with talent for 20 years, I had no illusions about, some people that look great are not so great. And, it's all spilling out in the news now. But, and it's, it's pretty scary. And you meet those people in the speaker world as well and fortunately, far between. In my case, at least, I feel really fortunate to have met some truly genuine, giving, caring, really wonderful people that have something great to say. But the ones that are they're wonderful on stage, but they are, they just get on their high horse about their hotel room or their car or they're this or they're that. It's like, please, I'm there to do what they need. And if a client, I just did an engagement for a medical company and I was the end speaker of the day. And I thought, it's local. I'm going to drive myself and I'll be there for the day. I want to hear what everybody from the chairman who kicks it off in the morning has to say until my thing at 3:00. And they were so touched. I thought, isn't that the way doesn't everybody do that? Shouldn't you do that? And they were just delighted. It was like, you gave up a day. Well, if I'd gotten on a plane and gone somewhere, I also would have given up a day. So to me, it didn't make any difference, but it just seemed like a no-brainer that, I'm there for you. I want to hear what your colleagues have to say before I get up and spout off.
Exactly. I worked for many, many years with, very high level talent, and I can probably count on one hand the number of true divas I dealt with in 10 years, 15 years, however long, whereas everybody else was so grateful and so gracious to be able to do what they love every day and get paid for it. They were like, I'm just here to do a job. And just, we had one show with, I think it was En Vogue. And like everything went out, like the power went out and all this other stuff. And they were just like, it's okay. Can we just have a slice of pie, while we wait?
Yeah.
So gracious. Such fantastic people.
Yeah.
So tell me, shifting gears, like tell me something that you're really excited about. Like what's next for you? What are you excited about in the coming year in your business?
Well, I had somebody in the speaking world point out to me that I'd been talking about the topic of hope, not as a topic with a capital T, but the concept, the idea of hope, including my book, Traveling Hopefully, that was my second book that came out, and pointed that out to me. And I thought, hope is what makes me get out of bed in the morning. And it's the jet fuel for me for everything. It's where you start your day. And I started doing some research because I'd never really thought, well, there's a topic here. I'm going to talk about hope. And I discovered a body of science, small but growing, that comes out of medicine. It really started with placebo studies, kind of how your mind, it's not just mind over matter, but how brain chemicals influence physiology and positive psychology, and it's called hope theory. And I read everything I could find on it and started applying those principles to the workplace, because what I found was, as an executive coach, it's not so much now, but people, in the early days, and I started right at the beginning of coaching, it was a little bit like being the executive being called into the principal's office. They were in a little bit of trouble, derailed a bit. Now it's, you're being invested in when you get a coach, and people are like, can I have one? But I found that companies would try to give strategies or ideas or resources or training sessions to people who really felt depleted and lost and hopeless. And it really hit me that you've got to buoy them up first. They've got to feel hopeful that there's a future for them here in this company, in this job, in the world, before you can start laying all these, strategies on them. And I started sort of playing with those ideas and applying them. And I used to say, when I'd speak, has anybody here ever said hope is not a strategy? And, 1,000 hands would go up. And I'd say, well, I beg to differ. I think hope is not just a strategy, but it may be the strategy. And so now I've written a book called The Hope-Driven Leader, which is really about how you infuse a sense of positiveness, of inspiration into your culture, starting with you. And it's really about your belief driving your behavior. And if you believe, I can change the world, maybe just one little corner or one little person's mindset at a time, but bit by bit, you leave that legacy and you make that impact. And that's it now. That's my topic. And it wasn't easy getting people to say, hope, because they thought, ooh, that's warm and fuzzy and female. And now it's like, no, that is a kick-ass. We're on board. We are servant leaders. It's our job to infuse that sense of hopefulness into our culture, into our employees, and then reap the benefits.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. When does the book come out?
April 10th, 2018. So it's right around the corner.
Fantastic. What do you think? I'm trying to remember who said this. Somebody said hope is the only thing greater than fear. Was that Martin Luther King Jr.?
I don't know. I'm going to have to find out. There are some great hope quotes that I have at my chapter heads, but yes. Yeah,
definitely. What do you think in terms of like, if you put hope on one side of the spectrum and change or fear on the other side, what do you think is the magic that helps to bridge that gap?
I actually do think that hope is I don't think hopelessness is necessarily the opposite. I think fear is more the opposite. Mm-hmm. And the other topic I talk about is dealing with change, challenge, and chaos, because that's when people go into their shells. Our primitive brain says, uh-oh, this is new and different, and that means bad, because that's just how we're wired to survive. And I think once you can point out to people that, yeah, you're going to feel when change happens, especially massive ongoing change, which is pretty much the world today. It's more complex, relentless, multi-layered, it never stops. So people's fear and suspicion level, like, what is this change meant to do? Or is this change just a placeholder for the next change? They get a little cynical and a little scared. And to say, this is a normal reaction. That fear and anxiety, insecurity is a perfectly rational response to ambiguity and change. But when you can flip that switch and see it's also an opportunity for growth, then as people look at that and say, oh, you know what? You could be right. We've had this restructure and I don't know where I'm going to end up. But if I raise my hand and say, hey, I'm game, I'll take that on, then doors can open for you. And I certainly saw that in my career. My first job at Sony, we went through 5 different companies in probably 6 years. And I went from being an assistant to being a VP in that same amount of time, just by saying, okay, I'll figure it out. And I was blessed by having people smarter and more experienced than I was around me, which was a great thing, because, I did ultimately figure it out, but it's not like there weren't a lot of rocky patches along the way. And when people just get, it's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel a little bit insecure. Do I know enough? Can I go with this change? Am I going to be able to be the one that goes the distance? Yeah, you just have to look at that in its face. That's what the pioneers of hope call true hope versus false hope. That you look at the future, you look at where you can go, and you recognize that there are pitfalls, and you say, I'm going to go there anyway. And it's realistic. It's not, I forever tell my coaching clients, I'm not there to bust anybody's dreams, but unlikely at age 60 you're going to become a professional baseball player or a ballerina. It's just, maybe. But I doubt it. So let's reframe that and make something realistic out of it and move forward in that straight line. And that's true hope. Mm-hmm.
I think there has to be something to look forward to for every person. And I think that's probably something that a lot of people, when they're looking at getting into any change or any transition, that having that little bit of hopefulness lingering out there as something to shoot for is a big difference between taking the risk and not. What do you think?
I do. And I think that people need to use that, not to sound too woo-woo, but the power of visualization. If you can really see your dream. Yeah. And I had never written a book in my life until I thought, okay, I've always wanted to do this. I bought a book off of Amazon on how to write a book proposal. And I could see that book cover, and I could see my name, and I could see it on a shelf. And, you just have to keep breathing life into that. And there's no reason I couldn't write a book. I knew how to write. Plenty of people do. It might not succeed. I couldn't set out to write a New York Times bestseller, but I could set out to write the best book I could write. Mm-hmm. And just by continuing to put some flesh on the bones and keep seeing that and keep moving forward. And I tell I've got 2 millennial sons, and I just, that's the secret of life. Figure out what you want, expect it not to be easy, And if it's important enough, it's probably not going to happen overnight. You just have to keep moving towards it a step at a time and know that every now and then you're going to get smacked back, and just part of the process.
Yep.
Just get up and keep going.
Yep. There's a great quote from one of my favorite movies. It's been one of my favorite movies for ages. It's called With Honors. And it's about a Harvard student who meets a homeless man and this and that. And the homeless man says to the Harvard student, you know, winners forget they're in a race. They just love to run.
Yeah.
And I think that with a lot of huge successes, like if you're talking New York Times #1 bestseller, a lot of those things just came out of either that divine download, labor of love, passion project thing, as opposed to the ones who say specifically, I'm going to do this. Because I think then you've got your eye on the prize instead of your eye on the mission.
Yeah, on the really the message and the essence of it. And that's like you were saying, that's when you sort of step into that flow and doors open a little bit more effortlessly than when you're, you know, hanging on to it. It's really the balance of letting things come to you versus making them happen. You're allowing them to happen. And that's a nice place to be. And I'm fortunate at this stage of my career and life that it's like clients find me, and you know, and I'm not too worried about where the next engagement's coming from. I just have faith that it's coming. I do the work, but I kind of release the outcome and know that it's, you know, it's around the corner. Yes, I'd like it to be tomorrow, but if it's next week or next month, that's okay too.
Yeah.
And it's a good way to live. It's a good way to let that balance of making things happen and letting them happen.
I think a lot of people drop off in terms of the pursuit of a career as a speaker before they hit that tipping point, because I've noticed there's this like inflexive flow of like when you're brand new, you got to hustle a lot, and you're getting like this many inquiries and this many gigs. But then as you keep your momentum going, it does that across the way. Yeah. And there comes a point where you probably don't do a whole lot of outbound outreach and marketing, and instead you're getting a lot of inbound inquiries and things like that. When did you notice that kind of a switch?
You know, yeah, probably about midway in the journey. And one thing I learned to do, and I really encourage anybody to do, is find the person who was the one that really pulled the trigger on bringing you in. And at my last one engagement, it was an assistant who said, "Isn't this how it works with everybody?" And I said, "Oh, not typically." I mean, she had a lot of authority. She just went online and started studying and looking for the message and found me, and they brought me in. And I asked around until I found out, well, who was it that put me forward? And I'll ask them, and what made you decide? And there was one place where I had told a little story, and the gist of it was, wait, now I'm going to blow this. I'm sorry, I'm just spacing on this.
That's okay, it'll come to you.
Okay. Yeah, that's what happens. When I do that on stage, I say, "What was I talking about?" Somebody's out there tell me what I'm talking about. And then they say, "Oh yeah, that's what you were talking about." But it's really when you find the person with hope is not a strategy or whatever it is that resonated. I had somebody say, "Oh, we just didn't want someone old and boring." And I thought, whoa, okay, I'm very grateful that I'm not the old and boring one, but that's good to know. I didn't tell them how old I was. After that, I thought, well, maybe I'll just keep that under wraps, but you know, not really. It's okay. So that's it's really interesting to find out what resonates, and also to learn that you're not going to fall apart if you don't hit it out of the park every time. Because there are some people that I really don't want to speak to a group that really doesn't want me, which is why I post a lot of things. It's like, it's all out there for you to see. If I'm a fit, that's fabulous. And if I'm not, or you're in doubt, I'm happy to talk to you. But if I don't fit, please don't bring me in. That would be the worst for both of us, because I don't want the agony, and they don't want that either. So being very clear about who you are and what you talk about, I think, is really key, as opposed to trying to fit all the different niches. And I think that's a trap early on, because I'd have bureau folks say, "Hey, can you talk about customer service? Hey, can you talk about this? Can you talk about," and I was tempted to say, "Sure." It's like, no, I can't. I'm not an expert in succession planning. Don't bring me in for that. There are people who are great at that, but I'm not one of them. So you really learn where your sweet spot is.
And you have to learn to be confident, like you said, in that incoming flow, and the trust that what's meant to be yours will come and end up in your lap, and you don't have to just say yes to everything for fear or scarcity thinking. That's a huge transition, I know, with some of the people that I've worked with, is finding that kernel of faith that if you say no and you do right by the client, that, you know, karma will pay you back.
Yeah, it'll come back around. And the topic the story was lift as you climb. Lift as you climb, take people with you. And I asked someone, I don't know, a couple of years after I first told this story that was related to that, and it was about climbing a Himalayan mountain, which I did, even though I'm by no means an adventurer. And she said, oh, you said lift as you climb, and that stuck with me. And I thought, that's interesting. And as a speaker on the practical business side, that was a message to say, keep that story in the mix when it's appropriate, because people hear it, and that's a message that's meaningful to people in the workplace who want to lock arms with somebody and take them along. So here, asking people, like, what made you, why'd you call me? Or what, sometimes somebody will say, oh, I watched this clip and it really spoke to me. And I really try to dig in and say, well, what clip was it? What did I say? I want to make sure I furthered that story for your group. So, some of those practical things, but so much of it is led by heart and gut. And one thing I say a lot when I speak is that we feel first and think second. And neuroscience has proven that. We all think we make these rational consumer decisions, and we don't. We rationalize the decision that we already made by our gut. And that's what people want, is they want the emotional connection before they can ever get to the thoughtful part. And
so
I think
true.
So critical for speakers to, don't hide your goofiness or your sense of humor or your brilliance or your physical disability or your color of your skin. That's why you're here. Talk about the depth of your soul and who you are. That's what people want.
It's true. It's true. People want that uniqueness of perspective from person to person, because two people could talk about the exact same topic, but because it comes through their life experience and how they showed up in this world, how they were born, whether it's, one race or another, or short or tall, or, disabled or able, anything like that is going to add nuances to the experience that will make the storytelling unique coming through their voice. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of new people need to truly appreciate and capitalize on even more, because that's the one thing that nobody can ever take from you is you.
It's a little hard when you're new at it, because it feels so risky and vulnerable. And I have a story that I told in a book and then decided I would tell it at a women's leadership group, thinking women will get this, but it was about a family suicide. And I ended up inheriting a mink coat. And it's just really sad. Drank myself into oblivion in an absolute horrible, just a moment of absolute despair, wrapped in this mink coat. And now, looking back, I can tell it with a bit of humor and pathos. And when I told that story, I had no idea how people would respond. And I thought, I'm going to look like an idiot telling this story on myself that really outs, my own foibles. And that's a story I think people respond to more than anything. And because we've all had that, now I call it, you've got your mink coat story. We've all got our mink coat story, that just the worst night, weekend, moment, challenge that we've dealt with, and we don't always rise to the occasion, but we even learn from the bad stuff. And those are the stories I think that make people really human and really relatable.
I've always, and I learned this the hard way, because I'm a recovering perfectionist, as are many people that I know. And I had to learn that perfection is not endearing. Perfection is intimidating. People relate to us as humans because of our flaws. You know, and did you have any struggles when you were getting started? Because whenever you step out onto a stage, it's showing up in a bigger way. It's like you said, it's being vulnerable. It opens yourself up to judgment and criticism. Just feedback from the random internet trolls to the random, walk by those kind of trolls in person. Did you have any struggles like that in your early career?
Well, I could hear in the back of my head my mom's Southern voice saying, "You're getting too big for your britches." But I also had a very wise friend who said, look, they're either going to applaud or throw tomatoes. And then I found out, or nothing, which is the worst. I'd rather they applaud or throw tomatoes. It's that, when you're right in the middle and nobody cares, that's not so great. You want to polarize. You want people either to think, I don't like that message, but it's making me think, or, yay, that really made sense to me, or really made a change in me. So, but it's true. If you want to step out, you got to, either going to applaud or they're going to throw tomatoes. So either way is okay.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you've got some strength in yourself and you learn that even if you flop, oh, gee, I learned something good. And to me, I define failure as really easy. If I learn nothing, it's a failure. Anything else, yay, it's a success. So I make it really easy so I can have successes all day long as I learn some new trick or tool or get some insight from something. And that's a good thing.
I think that's very true. And I completely agree with something you said earlier, too. You were just talking about listening and asking questions about either how people found you or why they chose you. One of the things I learned back when I was a performing artist is to study the audience and actually take notes on what made the audience react.
Yes.
And it's very different, obviously, when you're studying as an acrobat, which
right.
made them applaud. But something I noticed was the stuff that we thought was hard and impressive was never the same thing as what the audience thought. Have you ever noticed things like that in your
speaking? For sure. There are two things that I frequently put in, and I customize everything, but there are two sort of signature pieces that really, they just work. People relate to them. One's really physical and one is the mink coat story. And I've also had, just in this journey where you want other people to give you notes and feedback, I've had a couple of people sit in an audience and say, just ask them to observe the audience for me, because you may think you can get it from on stage, but you can't always. But somebody watching faces and listening to, for silences in the crowd can really give you some good feedback about that really worked. Oh, and one of my sons was with me once. Both of them have seen me speak, which is really fun when your kids go with you. And now one of them they both sold books for me too in the back of the room at different times. I could hear one of my sons behind me saying, oh, well, if you're on a little bit more of a personal journey, you want stuck. But if you're thinking more business, you need capture the mind share. And I can hear him thinking. And then I said to him, well, what I want you to watch and tell me what, and this happened to be a college audience, so it was great, is he's a college senior. And I said, just tell me what you think resonates with people. Keep an eye on it. And he came off the stage, and he's my boy. He said, oh, Mom, they were so fired up. They loved everything, which, of course, I didn't believe for a minute. But it was lovely to hear your child say that. You got it, Mom. That to me, that's where you walk your talk.
Mm-hmm.
When
you
your skeptics love you.
Exactly. You mentioned something earlier about, like, very early in your career, kind of the work-life balance thing. How has that been for you as a mother?
It was really difficult early on, and I had a good situation that my then husband, we're divorced now, but he stayed home with the kids when they were young. And I was a studio executive by then, so that made it much easier. I saw people struggle. In fact, my first book was about women as primary breadwinners and men as caregivers, because I knew so many people that did that. So I had far less pressure than the two career families that I saw, but you still have that guilt of you're not fully at work, you're not fully at home, and it's hard. And I see people struggle with it. The one change that I see more and more is that more young men are asking, well, how do you handle that? And I think that's a great sign. Yeah. And it's just, you got to figure it out and own it. And as much as I hope that institutions will help when they recognize this is not a women's issue or even a family issue, it's a business issue. And as they figure that out, they start to make it a little bit easier, but it's really the institutional meeting the individual, because you got to stake out your ground and say, no, I'm not working every night until 10 p.m. I can't do it.
Boundaries.
Yeah, right. Go home, have dinner with your kids, because you've got a young one, but after a while they don't necessarily want you around so much. So if you miss those years, that's tragic. And my kids love to torture me by saying, Mom, we needed you then. We didn't need you so much once you started your own business. Yeah, my guys, they're tough. It was a joke. But you have much more autonomy. You work just as hard, if not harder, as an entrepreneur. But there's a level of flexibility you can build. I can stop my day and go to something at one of their schools and then go back to work. Mm-hmm. And it can be a lot harder and a lot less forgiving in the corporate world to do that. So I like that entrepreneurs get to kind of chart their day and their long-term path.
What's something that you still hope for? Beyond releasing your new book this year, like looking in the next 10, 15, 20 years, like what's one more thing that you would love to see?
I'd love to be a voice for mental health. And this has been a challenge in my family that goes back many years. And I'm the guardian for my brother who's schizophrenic. And I have mental illness that runs through, he's schizophrenic and bipolar. And we've got a lot of health challenges around mental health in my family on both sides. And I've seen the stigma and the pain and the lack of social services and how difficult it is to eke out a quality of life with that. And so I've begun to talk more. I've worked a lot in healthcare and in pharmaceutical, and there have been times people have said, you know, when they find out my background, they'll say, well, would you talk about that? And the first time I asked permission before I did. And in this book that's coming out, I talk about my brother and say, you know, yes, he's schizophrenic and he's bipolar. Having a dual diagnosis is really difficult, but he's also was a 25-year college professor. He's written 8 novels and he has an editing business. So, you know, he's not just that. There's a lot more to him than that. So if I'm making forays into that world, but I'd love to do something that makes the way easier, especially for young people. Yeah. In that whole arena, because it's hard, and we're not necessarily there as a government, a people, to be able to provide everything that they need.
Very true.
So we'll see. And if I keep putting the word out and the energy out and taking little steps with that, I'm very careful not to step on the privacy of others. But as they become more comfortable with their own diagnoses and their own stories, then I'm more at liberty to share some of that. What do you do when you see that? And in this book, I have a chapter about, I call it radical hopefulness. What do people who have been homeless, mentally ill, physically ill, how did they get past that when everything else seems just like, how could one get past that? But, you know, you see it with speakers. There are speakers who are disabled that are just, as one of my people in my book calls it, beacons of hope. And one of the stories I cite is Helen Keller, who was one of the first severely disabled people. She was the first deafblind person ever to graduate from college in this country. And think about it, back then when it was a death sentence to be both deaf and blind and speechless. I mean, can you imagine? And she became a world-changing advocate and author and speaker and all of those things, and teacher. And so it's people who have the courage. I'm like, you know, compared to some of the people that I've encountered, I'm a 1%, you know, person. And I mean, my problems are nothing compared to what, you know, most of the world lives on $2 a day. And we can't even fathom that where we sit. Yeah. But that's the norm more than not. So knowing and I don't have any lofty ambition that I can, you know, change the world or cure a disease, but I'd love to think I can make a few people a little bit more hopeful about their prospects for the future.
Sometimes I think it's those micro ambitions, you know, the serving one person at a time, because that's really how we relate to each other as human beings, is one person can help another, and then that person can help another, and it just kind of starts the chain effect. And if you can inspire more than one person to help another, then that's the whole, you know, pay it forward strategy.
And it could be so simple. There's a story, and I was so fortunate to witness this that I included it in my book. And it was a medical device company that I spoke at, and we did a day-long strategy session, and you know, they were really thorough, and we did a bunch of phone calls, and I sent out questionnaires. We did our homework. And so we did this session, and then in the evening, it was a sales group. They wanted to reward their sales team, not just with the big banquet, which they did, but they took them on a surprise harbor cruise around Chicago, Lake Michigan. And these 4 sales leaders met, and the team didn't know where they were going. They just knew it was cold, dress warm. That's all they knew. So they came dolled up in all their finery because it was a sales banquet, and got on this yacht. And the 4 leaders said, we're servant leaders. They were in waiters' jackets, holding trays of wine and champagne. And they met everybody coming on board. They thought, what better way? And it was real. It was true to them. They waited on their own people through the whole cocktail hour and then into dinner. And I thought, that is not only the cleverest, the funniest, the most heartfelt example I've ever seen of servant leadership. So I just said, can I write a story about this? And they were so honored. And it just turned out so well. I said, can I put it in my book and on LinkedIn and on my blog? And they were like, have at it. And it was, they did it. And it was just a little bit of imagination and a little bit of how do we honor our folks? Hey, let's wait on them, and hey, let's have some fun with it. Let's make them laugh when they get on board this boat. And they did. And it was, I mean, they turned around a company that had gone through major change, and they just gave people the greatest time. And it was just, it's those things that make me think, these guys were superstars. Just, and it didn't cost a lot of money, didn't take a lot of advanced planning, but it was just the idea of what do we do to give back in the right way to our people? And they did it. And so I love being able to collect and chronicle those stories. So now I tell that story when I speak, and they get such a kick out of it, and it's really fun.
I love that. That's brilliant.
Isn't it?
What do you think, from all the years that you've been working on developing leadership in businesses and business places, what are the kinds of leaders we need more of in the world?
Well, of course, I would say hope-driven leaders, but I do think leaders, I think leaders that find their own style and their own path. I don't think there's a prescription. There are leaders who are pure numbers people that have to learn to get outside the number and tell a story and be human. And there are people that are all emotion and heart that really have to learn to be strategists. And you can learn a little bit of what you don't have, or certainly build it into your team. But it's I used to compare it to American Idol. You're not going to take a country singer and turn them into a rock star, but you want to be the best version of leader that you can be. And that resonates. People know when you're faking it. They know when it's real. And I tend to work with a lot of quiet leaders, a lot of introverted leaders, because we favor, and there's a lot of science behind this. In my Capture the Mindshare book, I talk about some of the great studies on introverts versus extroverts. But we do reward the extroverts, whether they know any more or deserve any more than the introverts or not. So people do sometimes have to learn how to ramp that up. But when an introverted or quiet leader can have a quiet strength, that's gold. And when a loud, brassy leader can tone it down and be a great listener, that's also a great source of strength. And people feel that they're human, they can make mistakes, but they really mean what they say, and they're really going to honor other people along that lift as you climb. They're really going to take people with them on the journey.
Fantastic. I love that, lift as you climb. We used to say, a couple of other agent people that I knew back in the day, we would always say the rising tide lifts all ships.
Absolutely.
And I think that goes hand in hand with what you talk about with lift as you climb. So I think that's a brilliant note to close on. I've had a great time talking to you, but before we go, if anybody's interested in learning more about you, where's the best place to go? Because I'll put links and everything.
Oh, please just go to my website, Libby at libbygill.com. They can find my new book is already on Amazon. So just go Google me on Amazon. And one thing I love to do, and I will do for any of your listeners, if you want, I have a couple of fun quizzes that are on my resources page and lots of giveaways. I'm a firm believer in, give away as much as you can. If you have faith, and there's always more where that came from. You're very comfortable giving things away. So I've got some quizzes and some articles, and anybody that ever wants to pick up the phone and say, hey, can we do a quick sample session? I want to see what it's like to talk to a coach, or to be a coach, or to solve a problem. And I'll hear from people, and I throw this out when I speak, and I'll hear from somebody a year later who says, oh, remember I saw you in San Diego and you said, it's like, I don't know if I'll remember it or not, but as soon as they tell me it's like, I know I said that, pick up the phone, and it's just a real honor to be able to offer something to somebody who just needs it in that moment.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. And which different people have different preferences as far as social networks where they like people to follow them. Where do you post most of your content kind of on a regular basis for people to follow along?
I'm pretty good with LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And again, it's all on my website, on my homepage.
See all the links. I'll make sure to put them all there. So thank you so much, Libby, for coming and sharing and just helping us kind of walk along the path with you as you went through your journey. And it's been great to have you.
Thank you for what you do, Melanie. I think speakers are lucky if they encounter you early on in their career and then stick with you forever. So you've got so much to share.
Thank you. So have a great day, everybody, and thank you for watching.